Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Chapter 2. A description of the farmer's daughter. The author carried to a market town, and then to the metropolis. The particulars of his journey. My mistress had a daughter of 9 years old, a child of forward parts for her age, very dexterous at her needle, a skilful dressing her baby. Her mother and she contrived to fit up the baby's cradle for me last night. The cradle was put into a small drawer of a cabinet, the drawer placed upon a hanging shelf for the fear of rats. This was my bed all the time I stayed with those people, though made more convenient by degrees. As I began to learn their language and make my wants known, this young girl was so handy that after I had once or twice pulled off my clothes before her, she was able to dress me and undress me, though I never gave her that trouble when she would let me do either myself. She made me 7 shirts, and some other linen as fine cloth as she could be got, which indeed was coarser than sackcloth, and she consistently washed for me with her own hands. When I pointed to anything, she told me the name of it in her own tongue, so that in a few days I was able to call for whatever I had in mind, too. She was very good-natured, and not above 40 feet high, being little for her age. She gave me the name Grildrig, which the family took up, and afterwards the whole kingdom. The word imports what Latins call Neonulcus, and Italians Homunceltino, and the English Mannikin. To her I chiefly owe my preservation in that country. We never parted while I was there. I called her my Glumdalchich, or little nurse, and I should be guilty of great ingratitude I omitted towards this honourable mention of her care and affection to me, which I heartily wished it laid in my power to requite as she deserved, instead of being innocent but unhappy instrument of her disgrace, as I have too much reason to fear. Now began to known and talked of it in the neighbourhood, that my master had found a strange animal in the fields, about the bigness of a splatnock, but shaped in every part like a human creature, which it likewise imitated in all its actions, and seemed to speak a little language of its own, and already earned several words of theirs, when erect upon 2 legs, and tame and gentle, would come when it was called, and do whatever it was bid, had the finest limbs in the world, and a complexion fairer than a nobleman's daughter of 3 years old. Another farmer who lived hard by was a particular friend of my master, came on a visit on purpose to inquire the truth of this story. I was immediately produced, and placed on the table. Where I walked I was commanded, drew my hanger, put it up again, made my reverence to my master's guest, and asked him in his own language how he did, and told him he was welcome, just as my little nurse had instructed me. This man, who was old and dim-sighted, put on his spectacles to behold me better, which I could not forbear laughing very heartily, for the eyes appeared like a full moon shining in the chamber at 2 windows. Our people, who discovered the cause of my mirth, bore me company in laughing, at which the old fellow was fool enough to be angry and out of countenance. He had a character of a great miser. To misfortune he well deserved it, by the cursed advice he gave my master, to shew me as a sight upon market day. In the next town, which was half an hour's riding, about 22 miles from our house, I guessed there was some mischief contriving, when I observed my master and his friend whispering long together, sometimes pointing at me, and my fears made me fancy that I overheard and understood some of their words. But the next morning, Glumdalclitch, my little nurse, told me the whole matter, which she had cunningly picked out from her mother. The poor girl laid me on her bosom, and fell a weeping with shame and grief. She apprehended some of the mischief that would happen to me from rude vulgar folks, who might squeeze me to death, or break one of my limbs in taking me in their hands. She observed how modest I was in my nature, how nicely I regarded my honour, and what an indignity I should conceive it to be exposed for money as a public spectacle for the meanest of people. She said her papa and mamma had promised that Grildrig should be hers, but now she found they meant to serve her as they did last year, when they pretended to give her a lamb, and yet, as soon as it was fat, sold to a butcher. For my own part, I may truly affirm that I was less concerned than my nurse. I had a strong hope which never left me, and I should one day recover my liberty. As to the ignominy of being carried around for a monster, I considered myself to be a perfect stranger in the country, and that such a misfortune should never be charged upon me as a reproach if I should ever return to England, since the King of Great Britain himself, in my condition, must have undergone the same distress. My master, pursuant to the advice of his friend, carried me in a box the next market day to the neighbouring town, and took along his little daughter, my nurse, upon a pillion behind him. The box was closed on every side, with a little door to me to go in and out, a few gimlet holes to let in air. The girl had been so careful to put the quilt in her baby bed into it, for me to lie down on. However, I was terribly shaken and discomposed on this journey, though it were but half an hour, for the horse went about 40 foot every step, and trotted so high that the agitation was equal to rising and falling of a ship in a great storm, but much more frequent. Our journey was somewhat further than from London to St. Albans. My master alighted at an inn which he used to frequent, and after consulting a while with the innkeeper, and making some necessary preparations, he hired the Gultrude, or a crier, to give notice at the town of a strange creature, to be seen as a sign of a green eagle, not so big as a spatnook, an animal in that country very finely shaped and 6 foot long, in every part of the body resembling a human creature, could speak several words, and performed 100 diverting tricks. I was placed upon a table in the largest room of the inn, which might be near 300 foot square. My little nurse stood on a low stool close to the table, to take care of me, and direct what I should do. My master, to avoid a crowd, would suffer only 30 people at a time to see me. I walked about on the table, as the girl commanded, She asked me questions as far as she knew my understanding to language reached, and I answered them as loud as I could. I turned about several times to the company, paid my humble respect, and said they were welcome, and used some other speeches I had been taught. I took up a thimble filled with liquor, which Glumdalclitch had given me for a cup, and drank their health. I drew out my hanger, and flourished it after the manner of fencers in England. My nurse gave me part of a straw, which I exercised as a pike, having learned the art in my youth. I was that day shewn to 12 sets of company, as I often forced to go over again with the same fopperties, till I was half dead with weariness and vexation. For those who had seen me made such wonderful reports, that the people were ready to break down the doors to come in. My master, for his own interest, would not suffer any one to touch me, except my nurse, and to prevent danger, the benches were set around the table at such a distance that put me out of everybody's reach. However, an unlucky schoolboy aimed a hazelnut directly at my head, which very narrowly missed me. Otherwise, it came with so much violence that it would have infallibly knocked out my brains, for it was as large as a small pummion. I had the satisfaction to see a young rogue well be beaten, and turned out of the room. My master gave public notice that he would shew me against the next market day, and in the meantime he prepared more convenient vehicle for me, which he had the reason to do enough to do. I was so tired with my first journey with entertaining company for 8 hours together, that I could hardly stand upon my legs, or speak a word. It was at least 3 days before I recovered my strength, and that I might have no rest at home. All the neighbouring gentlemen, for 100 miles round, of hearing my fame, came to see at my master's own house. There could not be fewer than 30 people with their wives and children, for the country was very populous, that my master demanded the rate of a full room whenever he shewed me at home, although it were only to a single family, so that for some time I had but little ease every day of the week, except for Wednesday, which is their Sabbath, although I were not carried into the town. My master found how profitable I was like to be, resolving to carry me to the most considerable cities to the kingdom, having therefore provided himself with all the necessaries for a long journey, and settled his affairs at home. He took leave of his wife upon the 17th of August, 1703. About 2 months after my arrival, we set out for the metropolis, situated near the middle of that empire, and about 3,000 miles distant from our house. My master made his daughter a Glumdalclitch ride behind him. She carried me on her lap in a box tied around her waist. The girl had lined it all on sides with the softest cloth she could get, well quilted underneath, furnished it with her baby's bed, provided me with linen and other necessaries, and made everything as convenient as she could. We had no other company but a boy of the house, who rode after us with the luggage. My master's design was to shew me in all towns by the way, to step out of the road for 50 or 100 miles to any village or person of quality's house where he might expect the custom. We made easy journeys of not above 7 or 8 score miles a day, for Glumdalclitch, on purpose to spare me, complained that she was tired of trotting of the horse. She often took me out of the box at my own desire to give me air, and shew me the country. but always held me fast by a lead string. We passed over a 5 or 6 many degrees broader and deeper than the Nile or the Ganges, and there was hardly a rivulet so small that Thames at London Bridge. We were 10 weeks in our journey, and I was shewn in 18 large towns, besides many villages and private families. On the 26th day on October, we arrived at the metropolis, called in their language Lord Bletchford, or Pride of the Universe. My master took a lodging in the principal street of the city, not far from the royal palace, and put out bills in the usual form, containing an exact description of my person and parts. He hired a large room, between 300 or 400 foot wide, and provided a table, 60 foot in diameter, which I was to act my part, palisaded it round 3 foot from the edge, and as many high to prevent my falling over. I was shewn 10 times a day, to the wonder and satisfaction of people. I could now speak the language tolerably well, and perfectly understood every word that was spoken to me. Besides, I had learned their alphabet, and could make a shift to explain a sentence, here and there, for Glumdalclitch had been my instructor while we were at home, and at the leisure hours during our journey, he carried a little book in her pocket, not much larger than a Samson's Atlas. It was a common treatise for the use of young girls, in giving short account for the religion. Out of this she taught me my letters, and interpreted the words.